Good evening. My name is Sarah Zenaida Gould, and I am Interim Executive Director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's panelists for a discussion about migration and civil rights in the 21st century, with leaders from the League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC. Founded in 1929 in Corpus Christi, Texas, LULAC is the nation's oldest and largest Latino civil rights organization. Their mission is to advance the economic condition, educational attainment, political influence, housing, health, and civil rights of the Hispanic population of the United States. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to thank our funders, especially the City of San Antonio, and all of our individual donors. If you'd like to learn more about supporting MACRI, I invite you to visit somosmacri.org/donate. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Tonight, we are joined by Domingo Garcia, National President of LULAC, Cindy Benavides, Executive Director of LULAC, Maggie Rivera, Illinois State Director of LULAC. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Their full bios can be found on the event page. Now I would like to invite Mr. Garcia to tell us about LULAC's current immigration platform.
Okay, well, thank you for having us and having, and by the way, just congratulations on having the organization, there in San Antonio, El Corazón de Texas, and one of the founding places of cultura, especially for Chicanos, Mexican Americans, Latinos, whatever term you prefer. But yeah, I'm here as the National LULAC president because my story is like an American story. My father crossed the Rio Grande when he was 17 years old, undocumented, and came to the United States looking for the American dream and married my mother, who was a Native American Apache. And she was 17, he was 20, and they started a family, and I'm the oldest of 7 of a mix. He was undocumented when he got here. And got his citizenship later. But that American dream has been driving America for the last 200 years. As people, whether they came from Italy, Ireland, China, or Mexico, or Central America, that dream has continued. And that beacon of light that the Statue of Liberty stands for is something that LULAC has been at the forefront fighting for. So where are we at now? Mira, we've had what I call 4 years of El Cucuy in La Casa Blanca with orange hair scaring people about the immigrants are coming, the refugees are coming, the caravans are coming, and we need to build a wall, and we need to put kids in cages, and we need to cut legal immigration because otherwise they're going to take over. And the reality is it's it's una mentira, a lie. It's not the first time we've heard these lies. The Know Nothing Party did that early in the 19th century. The eugenics movement that tried to limit immigration just to basically Northern Europeans, to keep out, by the way, Irish, Catholics, Jews, Southern Europeans, including Italians, as being undesirable. So we've heard this rhetoric before. I guess I didn't think it was going to happen in my lifetime at the extreme that it has. So LULAC has been fighting back against these elements. And that means that right now we are fighting to make sure that in the first 100 days that President-elect Biden will have an immigration reform package that we have drafted, among those to extend DACA for 4 years, to considering extending that protection to the parents of DACA students, so that we can at least legalize for 4 years this group of students. The issue that's going to be the hardest to deal with in releasing those 666 children from the cages that they've been holed up from, separated from their parents. In American history, short of the Japanese internment during World War II of thousands of families, taking a child from his mother's arms and putting them into a cold cage, jail, whatever they were putting them in, has to reek of the unchristian, un-Americanness, especially if we think about Christmas, where, if you think about it, Jesus and Mary and Joseph were refugees, and everybody denied them entrance to their door. That's what Las Posadas are about. It wasn't until the final day that they were given shelter And that's what these families, even though they might be coming from Central America or Mexico, they're just looking for shelter and a place to stay, and they don't deserve to have their children taken away from them. So we're hoping that President Biden returns those children immediately to them. Same thing happens with TPS, temporary protective status for immigrants, primarily from Central America. The president can extend that protection for 4 more years and allow those refugees to stay in the country. He can stop all funding for the border wall. That wall is, again, a national, international disgrace. It should never have been built. And Mr. President-elect Biden, we need to tear down that wall as soon as possible. And I know a lot of Mexicano construction companies are willing to do that for you. The issue that I see is the most pressing and also the most difficult politically, especially if the Republicans can't maintain their majority in the Senate. We have been trying to pass an immigration reform bill since 1984, which was the last one that was passed. There's been little bits and pieces, but nothing that's been progressive. So what are we going to do with those 13 million immigrants in this country who are undocumented? They're not going to be deported, but they are being exploited. They are being abused. They are being relegated to second-class citizenship, as well as their children. Even though they pay taxes, LULAC has been at the forefront of being at meatpacking plants across America that were hard hit by COVID, with many workers getting sick, many dying. Many of them were immigrants. Many of them were undocumented with false papers. We have been fighting to make sure that the safety of those workers is improved. We've met with the CEOs of the top 5 companies and continue to meet with them to improve worker safety. But they're doing jobs that nobody else would do. But that's what puts the carnitas and the pork chops and la fajitas and the steaks on our tables. They're essential workers, and they need to be protected. And the only way we can do that is by legalizing them. Now, I've heard the chorus of immigrant groups say, well, Domingo, we need to pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill that gives everybody a permanent residency and a pathway to citizenship. And I support that. But we have to look at it from a practical, realistic way. I'm not about, the idealism of we want anything from abolishing ICE or open borders. To me, that's puro pedo. That's never going to happen. It's pie in the sky stuff. But what can happen is we can reform ICE to make it a human reform organization that can deal with these individuals in a humane way, in a sheltering way, without treating them as criminals. I do think we can open our legal system to allow more immigrants that are already in line, let's say from Mexico or from India or other countries, and allow them to have more lanes to come in so they can come here legally and therefore change their status and become permanent residents and productive Americans in society. To do that, we're going to have to find a compromise bill. And that means that John Cornyn, Marco Rubio, Mitt Romney are going to have to join Senators Durbin, maybe Senator Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and now Senator-elect Ben Lujan from New Mexico, who I just talked to a couple of days ago, to find that mid-senator position that will allow an immigration bill to not only pass the Congress, pass the Senate, and then be signed by President Biden, and then withstand the attacks that will inevitably come from, we got this pendejo attorney general here in Texas named Paxton, who like today filed a suit in the Supreme Court to invalidate Wisconsin, Illinois, and Pennsylvania votes. I mean, again, when you got ideologues on the far right, you have to be prepared. So you make sure that whatever you pass will withstand the political pressures and also the legal challenges that will come from the far right. So that to me is where I think LULAC is going to be instrumental. We want President-elect Biden to be held to his word that an immigration reform bill will be passed in the first 100 days of his administration. And we are looking forward to working with both Democrats and Republicans to find that maybe half a loaf. I know a lot of people want the whole loaf. And I mean, the whole enchilada, as we say in Texas. But no, I mean, sometimes half an enchilada is pretty good, especially if you're hungry. And let me tell you, a lot of these immigrants are hungry. They've been waiting for something to happen because they know that the next day they can be deported. They can get a DWI. Here in Dallas, we had a case of a high school senior got picked up on a speeding ticket. He had a joint and he got deported. and he had been here almost all his life. So those tragedies continue to happen. So we need to reunite our families, and we need to pass an immigration reform bill. How it might look, maybe we extend the citizenship, the permanent residency to 7 or 10 years before they can apply, so that the Republicans, the main issue with the Republican Party opposing immigration is they're afraid of our votes. They saw the numbers that turned out in 2020, but they should also see that they got substantial increases in Latino voters in the Rio Grande Valley, in Miami-Dade, and in the Bronx. Okay, so if they can appeal to the ideas as opposed to the suppression and the repression we've been seeing, I think that we might be able to win over a bipartisan immigration package that will pass and become law in the first 100 days. There's other issues that LULAC has been dealing with, repealing the Muslim ban, which we think that, these banning of Muslims from different countries was illegal to begin with. I cannot believe the Supreme Court allowed that. I have been to Tijuana, Mexico, where there are hundreds of deported veterans. These were U.S. permanent residents who served our country in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and then they came back with PTSD and had some kind of issue, and they got arrested, and then they got deported. And they're in the bunker in Tijuana, where me and Senator Duckworth, by the way, from Illinois, Maggie, was with me on Veterans Day last year. And we were able to bring back a veteran to Chicago who had been deported, got a pardon from the governor of Illinois, and now he's been reunited with his family. But that's one person. There are thousands more. And we need to make sure that President Biden brings back those deported veterans home to their families and to the country that they have served honorably, and the uniforms that they wore. We need help with the green card veterans. People think that when they join the military, they're automatically U.S. citizens. They're not. The Army, and one of the things I'm going to bring up with Secretary of the Army McCarthy sometime in the next week or two. And by the way, there was a press conference today. For those of you who may not know, LULAC was real active supporting the family of Vanessa Gain, a young private at Fort Hood, Texas, who disappeared. Their family reached out to our LULAC council there in Killeen, Texas. What happened to Mija? What happened to my daughter? We started having protests every Friday. We started having meetings and press conferences. And as a result of that, eventually Vanessa Gaines' body was found. But we also found that there were thousands of women who had been abused, exploited, raped in the military, and the military did nothing. We are proud to announce that because of LULAC's efforts, putting 2 members of of LULAC on an independent panel. Today, the Army demoted and fired 14 officers at Fort Hood. They have implemented a new program to deal with sexual harassment allegations. And hopefully they will put in a new program to make sure that any permanent residents become U.S. citizens upon finishing their term in service if they're honorably discharged. We need to extend the migrant protection protocols for those immigrants who are just getting to the border, so they're not put in concentration camps and squalid camps in Mexico. That return them to Mexico strategy is not humane, it's not legal, it's not just. Somebody's claim should be adjudged by a judge, and be said you have either a legitimate claim or not. But they shouldn't be made to wait in Mexico where they are at the mercy of cartels, of criminal elements, and of human trafficking. So we're hopeful that we return to the law and the process of asylum claims in a just manner. That is kind of a brief overview. I don't want to take up too much more time, pero muchísimas gracias. We look forward to working with y'all. La lucha sigue para adelante. LULAC nunca se ha rajado since 1929. We've been at the forefront fighting lawsuits, going to courts, fighting the elections, and fighting for the right of every person to have their day in court, or their right to vote, or the right to have the career of his or her choice. And we will continue to do so for the next 100 years. Muchísimas gracias. Que viva la raza.
Thank you so much for that overview of everything LULAC is doing regarding immigration today. I want to turn it over to Cindy Benavides. And Cindy, could you just talk to us a little bit about yourself, as well as the history of LULAC when it comes to the topic of immigration?
Absolutely, Sarah, and thank you so much to the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute for this invitation, and to our national president, Domingo Garcia, for representing us so well. I will tell you, in terms of LULAC, for those who are just tuning in, we were founded in 1929, over 91 years ago. So we are 91 years young, 91 years strong. And for 91 years, our LULACers, our LULAC organization, has protected and defended our Latino community across America. Sarah, what we find oftentimes is a misperception and narrative of who Latinos are in America. And I know I'm talking to many of our Texan community, but also individuals across the country. And oftentimes when we think of Latinos, we think about immigrants, but in fact, immigrants only make a percentage of who the Latino community is. For those who are in Texas, I know many of you say that you did not cross the border crossed you. And, when we look at the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty, the truth is that is in fact true, that before Nuevo Mexico was New Mexico, it was Nuevo Mexico, and Texas was Texas before it was Texas, and California. And so many of the names that we see in the Southwest are of Spanish origin because of the influence that the Spaniards and the Mexican community had in that region. And, when the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty occurred, again, our Mexican community was able to become U.S. citizens, retain their property, and have all the full rights of a U.S. citizen. But unfortunately, we saw that did not happen, that a lot of our community was displaced. And in fact, Sarah, there were actually laws in place that prohibited our community from learning English. And that, in a way, impacted our ability to be able to vote and to be able to work in key positions within our different state of Texas as well across the country. We were completely disenfranchised. And just to take a minute in terms of LULAC and our history, LULAC has been the beacon of hope for so many for 91 years. And we have especially worked around key issues like education, like immigration, like voting rights. When you look at our mission, the truth is, and the question is, what does LULAC not do? Because LULAC represents our organization on multiple fronts. And I will tell you, whether it's the environment, whether it's voting rights, whether it's making sure that our veterans and our military are protected, whether it's making sure that there's pay equity for women, as well as for protections for our LGBT community, LULAC is working on all fronts. So we are a civil rights organization that is always leading the way and making sure that we're addressing those needs and gaps that are impacting our community. And so just to highlight a couple of milestones, back in 1931, we established the first women's office to address issues impacting women, our Latinas, across the country, 1931. We also in 1945 had our local council in California really got Mendez versus Westminster started, which integrated the schools in Orange County, California. And that was the precedent to Brown versus Board of Education, which integrated the schools across all America. In the 1950s, because our schools were segregated, in fact, they were called the Mexican schools, LULAC created something called the Little School of the 400, which was meant to teach 400 English words to our Mexican children. And that model was taken by then Congressman Johnson, who becomes President Johnson. And he takes that model and creates Head Start, which has impacted millions and millions of children and families across this country since the 1960s. I would say since then, LULAC, particularly on the immigration front, Sarah, has worked on key legislation and cases. But I tell you, we are really proud of our history, one, in supporting the United Farm Workers in the struggle for minimum wage in the 1960s, as well as leading the way in 1986 and defining our position as Mexican Americans for the Immigration and Reform Act of 1986 under President Reagan. And then we also had the lawsuit, LULAC versus INS, which was to make sure that INS processed eligible amnesty applications, and we were actually able to settle that in 2003, and 100,000 individuals became legal permanent residents because of our lawsuit. Since then, Sarah, the commitment that LULAC has and continues to have for our community only has grown. Today, we continue to fight on multiple fronts, whether it's making sure that the citizenship question in the census was taken out, so that we are not, one, creating fear tactics to scare our community into not answering the census. And again, we saw it as a tactic to make sure that our community becomes invisible. And what I would tell you is that it's so important that we know the facts and that we know the numbers. Today, Latinos are 18% of the total population, or 60 million strong. And in just 30 years, Sarah, our community will be 130 million strong. And what that means is that we will be close to 30% of the total US population. So if you can just imagine, 1 in 3 Americans will be of Latino ancestry. There is no doubt, there is no question that our Latino community is decisive in the future of this country. And what we're seeing today, as President Garcia pointed out, is that during this pandemic, Latinos are the essential workers of America. In fact, Surgeon General Adams has said that 5 out of 6 Latinos have to leave their houses every single day to work and get paid. Again, we're working in major industries like our farm working community. We're over 90% of all farm workers. So as we enjoy a fruit or a vegetable, we have to be mindful that who is picking those fields, who is picking our fruit and vegetable, is our community. We have to be mindful that when we're eating a ham for Thanksgiving or turkey, or making tamales with pork or chicken or meat, that who is putting that meat on our table is our community. And that we have to also be cognizant that 25% of all grocery store workers are of Latino origin, and that we also work in major industries like healthcare. So we are the nurses, the technicians, the administrators, the doctors, the surgeons. We are the custodians. We are the individuals that are working at all levels. And I just want us to think of all the major industries where Latinos are involved. And the truth is that Latinos are in every single industry. I will tell you where we're not is on the corporate boards of corporations in America. And that's why LULAC is also fighting for representation for Latinos. We actually have a hashtag called Nothing About Us Without Us, and we can't be what we can't see. And when we look at corporations in America, the truth is the majority of them lack a single Latino. And these are companies who market to the Latino community, profit from the Latino community, but are not including the Latino community at the highest level. And so we have still a lot of work to do, Sarah. We still have, plenty of work to keep us busy as we've seen President-elect Biden and Harris come into office. We are working with the transition team to meet a lot of different demands with the leadership of our national president, Domingo Garcia, and our national board. So know that, we are very vigilant. Estamos activos. If you see the ojeras under my eyes, it's because we're working extremely long hours to make sure that our voices are represented. And you will always catch our national president, in the media, in the news, in the newspapers, on the radio, voicing our concerns and making sure that we are amplifying that voice. As we look ahead, the work that we as a community have is that we have to shift the narrative of how Latinos are perceived in America. And the truth is, for the last 4 years, Latinos have become a target. Our immigrant community has become a target. When we look at what happened in El Paso, this is the first time that we see our ethnicity used as a weapon against us. And so, please understand that when we are looking at the FBI report in terms of hate crimes, there's no doubt that we have a massive task ahead in terms of reframing and making sure that the narrative of who we are is coming directly from us and not from anyone else. I'll shift, Sarah, here into my personal story, only to say that I'm very fortunate that I had parents who were self-determined, who had a vision bigger than themselves. And my parents immigrated from Honduras. My mom brought me and in her arms at the age of 1. She crossed the US border. And part of it was at that time in the 1980s, they already saw the path that Honduras was heading. And unfortunately today, San Pedro Sula, the second largest capital in Honduras, has the highest murder rate per capita in the world. And so we know that crime is big. Unfortunately, we also see, what has occurred with the economy, with the lack of access and opportunities. And because of the vision of my parents, we ended up in South Central Los Angeles. On our free time, we used to pick up cans in the streets of Los Angeles. At that time, that seemed like just an after school type of event that we did. And then when we moved to Virginia, my mom established her cleaning company. And so for a long time, I helped my mom clean houses. And I will tell you, Sarah, that, for me, it's absolutely a privilege to be able to be at the helm of our largest and oldest national Latino civil rights organization as the CEO, making sure that the voices of our community, our very diverse community, is reflected, making sure that every single day when I walk into a meeting or when I'm joining a Zoom meeting or when I'm joining a conference call, that they hear very clearly the voices and the needs of our community. And I will end it with this, and that is to say, Sarah, that LULAC has been active in terms of hunger relief projects, whether it's food access or whether it's financial access, and making sure that our community has what they need during this pandemic, as so many have been unemployed or furloughed without pay. And one of the stories I can share is that in one of the activations, a mother came up to me and she asked, or she rather stated, that she had been worried about the decision that she had ahead. And her decision was if she could buy frijoles, flour, and cooking oil versus laundry detergent. And I just want us to understand the suffering that our community is currently experiencing. Many of them cannot access any of the resources available through the government. I want us to understand that 1 in 3 of our children and families do not have access to technology and broadband, that there's been a 400% increase in terms of Fs that our middle school and high school Latino children are receiving during this global pandemic. And so I want us to be clear, and this is really a call to action. We have a lot of work ahead. And the truth is that if we're silent, then our voices will remain silent. Our issues will be in the shadows. And all of us have to join together to make sure that we are screaming at the top of our lungs, that we are having these meetings, that we're putting it on social media, that these are issues that are impacting our community. Because if we're not speaking up, if we're not leading the way as advocates, as heads of our households, then we will stay still behind and we will absolutely not be able to make progress. And so as we think of the future, there's absolutely a lot of hope in terms of what it can be, but please know that it will take all of us in terms of taking action. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for that powerful testimony. Thank you, Cindy. I do want to turn it over to Maggie. Maggie, one of the things that I think keeps coming up is the impact of COVID on the immigrant community, and I know you work a lot with the rural community there in Illinois. Tell us more about what's happening in your state.
Well, here in the state of Illinois, first of all, I want to say thank you for the invitation. It's really a privilege to be here with our CEO and our national president. And in the state of Illinois, we are a recipient of migrant farm workers. So what that means is that we get a lot of the farm workers that come from Texas or California or Florida to work in the fields of Illinois during the harvesting season. So since COVID started, that immediately put a hamper in the ability for the farm workers to be able to perform their jobs, to be able to earn the money that they need to survive throughout the year. Because the season starts in March, just when all the migrant farm workers are arriving, it was held back. So a lot of the migrants were not able to travel here until like perhaps May, June. By that time, half of the season had gone by, and some of them arrived when it was being hardest hit, and they struggled to be able to start working right away because of so many different new rules that we have to abide by as far as having to stay at home for 14 days before you can actually go out and do anything. Some families came infected, so they had to immediately seek medical assistance and shelter for the 14 required days. And by the time they got around to be able to go back into the fields, well, the season was almost over. And I'm only referring to the migrant and seasonal farm workers because that is the organization and the population that I serve as the leader of the Illinois Migrant Council. But that is not, that is just one small population in the state of Illinois. But everyone has been struggling, especially the immigrant community, and everything that Domingo and Cindy have said about our real struggles, about the lack of food, about the lack of financial assistance, about the lack of even clothing. I mean, something that we would never even think about. We hear a lot from the families, a lot from the moms, that our kids no longer fit into the clothes that they had because this pandemic has forced us to stay home. So the kids are not active, so therefore they're gaining weight. And there's no resources to be able to get them what they need. So they're having to adjust and go back to the old-fashioned way of the beginning of our times when you just did what you have. And clothing, I mean, something that we don't think about, but food. A lot of them were not able to access the food that they needed to be able to provide the right nutrition to the kids so that they're able to stay well nutridos, so that they have the capability of being able to learn in a new way that they are being forced. Cindy highlighted this on how a lot of our kids do not have the means to be able to get educated from home. They don't have a laptop. They don't have the electronics that they need. They don't have the connections that they need. And because of LULAC, we were able to bring a lot of laptops to our migrant farm worker children, so that they will be able to stay connected and be able to continue their education in the new way of learning. And that's just one small example of this, but we are having to be very creative on how we help our communities. If you live in a large city, like in the city of Chicago, any vicinity of Chicago, it's a lot easier to be able to access food, clothing, financial assistance. But if you live in the rural community, like where we live, where we have the farm workers, where we have a lot of the immigrants, and there's no public transportation, and there's no food pantry that you can very easily access by foot, that presents a huge problem. So as our organization and partnering with our LULAC councils across the state of Illinois, we have been able to bring this relief to our families. We were also able to access a little bit of funding through the state of Illinois financial COVID funding to be able to bring to our local councils so that they would disseminate some relief to the population that they're servicing their areas. So we have always been trained by our LULAC leaders to collaborate, to be able to look for the resources and bring resources to our communities. We have always been taught that one hand needs to help the other hand, that we need to lock arms so that we can create that long chain that is going to reach every corner of our communities to find those that are most vulnerable, those that are mostly in need. We have had so many families that had multiple deaths in their families because of COVID. Without the resources of being able to give them a proper burial, without being able to at least have a cell phone and connect with them to say goodbye. To say the least, it has been a very, very sad year because this is what going almost into our 9th month of having to deal with this. And I'm sure this is no different in every other state or every other country that has been literally bombarded by this invisible enemy. But the here and now is that we have learned so many things from this pandemic. We have learned that we are indeed a one for all and all for one. As we have navigated through this pandemic, we have been able to lean on one another so that we can bring out whatever is said, pedacito de pan or vaso de leche to our communities. And I cannot tell you the calls, the numerous calls, they literally, like Cindy said, we all have ojeras because of this. We all have learned to work on very minimal sleep. There's no more 9 to 5. There's no more Monday through Friday. It's 24/7. We have to stay on our feet. We have to stay vigilant so that if we have a family that is in dire need, we need to be able to readily be able to get up and hop in a car or whatever it takes to go and bring a aid. And at the same time, we have learned that we need to protect ourselves so that we can protect our families. And in Illinois, through the Illinois Migrant Council, we have been very fortunate to be able to access a lot of the PPE that our communities need. Just this 2 days prior to Thanksgiving, some of our council members and I spent 17 hours traveling through the state of Illinois and delivering different PPE to our communities, to our partner and our sister organizations that cooperate with one another, so that we can make sure that if families decided to have any kind of gathering, whether they were hopefully small gatherings, they had protection. They had the sanitizers. They have the wipes to be able to sanitize their homes and their locations. They had the masks to be able to protect themselves if they had to go out and work. And I think Cindy also highlighted the fact that we are the frontline workers. We cannot say, la pandemia, I'm going to stay home. We can, because the businesses, the hospitals, the schools, every single kind of business out there depends on us. They depend on our labor. If we don't do the work, America paralyzes. It kind of goes back to one day without an immigrant. Well, this truly is the time that people should pay attention and realize that if we have no immigrants, we don't have a nation. And for us to be able to do this kind of work is something that we do from the heart, because you have to realize that LULAC members are all volunteers. We don't get paid to do this, from Domingo all the way down to the newest member in any of our councils. We do this because we have it in our hearts to be able to help our communities to make a better world for everyone. Because when we go out and help our communities, we don't just say we're going to help the community so that we can help the Mexican, the Colombian, Puerto Rican, whatever. No, it helps the entire community. We truly believe on it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village. It takes an entire community to fight this pandemic. And that's what it looks like here in Illinois. It's very strong. Our governor just issued a lot of lockdowns for a lot of different businesses. I know that California started a lockdown on Monday because my daughter lives there, which kind of like puts you in oh no, your kids are there and now I can't even see them for Christmas. So thank God for Zoom. Thank God for every other media outlet that allows us to hear each other and see our faces. Pero yeah, Domingo dijo y lo dijo muy bien. We have a lot of work. We're not done. And we have to continue doing the best that we can with what little that we have. to be able to bring some kind of relief to our communities, and hasta que Dios quiera, and hopefully, God willing, He will give us the strength to continue and the means to bring what our communities need.
Thank you so much for that. I did want to ask a question about one of the things that I think LULAC is particularly well known for, and that's that LULAC has this history of filing lawsuits on behalf of the public's civil rights. And Cindy, you mentioned the 2003 case of LULAC versus INS, but could you bring us up to speed a little bit on some of the other court cases you're working on right now that have to deal with immigration rights?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Sarah. And, I'll also ask our national president to join in. I don't know that many folks know, but he has a legal background as well. And he's based out of Dallas, Texas. And let me tell you, it almost feels like every other day, our national president with our LULAC leadership in Texas is filing a lawsuit. I just want to give a quick shout out to our general counsel, Luis Vera, who has been leading the charge for LULAC for over 20 plus years in terms of the many challenges that LULAC has filed. But again, we really started early. Gosh, it almost feels like in the 1930s in terms of integrating schools. And again, LULAC has led the way when it comes to education, but with Mendez versus Westminster. And I would point out also with Hernandez versus Texas, which allowed our community to be represented on juries. And since then, Sarah, LULAC has filed multiple lawsuits in connecting with our general counsel. He's mentioned that we have over 150 plus lawsuits pending. So that just tells you about how many lawsuits we're involved in, and they range in terms of what we're doing. One of the major ones is actually against the EPA in terms of a pesticide that's used in our farm working community. And so we're going to continue to fight on that end in Texas. And I know Domingo can jump into this. We filed lawsuits when the Secretary of State there, the governor, tried to purge 98,000 eligible naturalized voters from the rolls. We filed lawsuits in Dodge City when, believe it or not, the only polling location was moved outside of the city to a place that was not accessible. And since then, we're on a number of advocacy briefs, and we're on a number of lawsuits. LULAC, serves as a lead plaintiff, and part of it, Sarah, is that LULAC actually has standing in all 50 states across the country. And so we are, one of the few organizations that has been able to have cases lead to the U.S. Supreme Court because of our legacy and because of the 91 years history that we have across the country. But I'm going to pause there and see if President Garcia wants to chime in, as he's really been leading the front on not everything national, but also everything Texas.
It looks like you're muted.
Yeah. Every 10 years, LULAC has a lawsuit because we have to file a gerrymandering redistricting lawsuit in Texas every 10 years, as well as in other states, California, Arizona. We've had to file lawsuits everywhere on gerrymandering and redistricting. And, I was called that they wanted to do a story about Gus Garcia, who was from San Antonio, and who argued, the first Mexican-American lawyer to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court, Hernandez versus Texas, that allowed Latinos to serve as jurors in Texas and as grand jurors. So, our history has been one of opening doors and breaking down doors to let people in and have full opportunity. I expect that we will continue litigation this year. We have looked at issues regarding the voter suppression across the country, and especially in southern states, and dealing with those issues. We have looked at, when we're in Texas, we don't realize that in other states you can register to vote the same day. And if I'm Domingo and I go to San Antonio and register somebody to vote, I committed a felony because I'm not a resident of Bexar County. How absurd is that? Okay, but we've kind of let the Republicans try to keep our vote down, and we need to make sure we continue those battles. There's going to be some interesting fights that I think. Latinos have been impacted by COVID the most hard at various levels. The fact of the matter is the PPE funding, the CARES package, didn't really hit Jose and Maria on Main Street, okay, or in San Antonio on West Commerce, or in East LA on Whittier Boulevard, or in Chicago in Pilsen. They didn't get the help that they needed. And we need to make sure that any funding gets to the community, and if not, we take legal action as well as administrative, political action to make sure those funds get there. If you look at what's happening in El Paso, Texas today with COVID-19, but it's also happening across the country. These families need immediate assistance, dollars in their pockets. If they're saying stay at home, which I think in California, and Maggie, you were telling me in Chicago, right? Well, if you stay at home, that means you don't got a check many times. And that means we need the federal governments to help out, and irregardless if they're documented or undocumented or their citizenship status, provide assistance to those families to get them through this time, both in a health situation as well as economically. And if not, we got to challenge them. And that might be through the court system or through administrative procedures or the legislative process. But we plan to do that. The only other lawsuit I will tell you that I think we need to do is I talked to Cindy that we wanted to join the lawsuit to free those 666 children before Christmas. I think that's really important symbolically. The fact that, children ages 1 through 10 are being detained down there on the border. If we can free them before Christmas, I think we can shame the president, shame the acting director of ICE to do the right thing and just reunite them with their families, because they should never be detained for crimes they have not committed and for political piñatas that they were being used for. So I think that's where we're probably looking at filing our next lawsuit and joining an ongoing litigation with the ACLU versus the Homeland Security.
Thank you for that. I have a question about migration as we enter deeper into the 21st century. One of the challenges that the whole world faces right now is climate change. And we know that people of color are going to take the brunt of climate change, and that here in the US, we already have a lot of communities of color experiencing the impact of climate change. And it's predicted that climate change is going to, in fact, cause greater migration. And I think some of the things that are happening right now in Latin America and other places too may be exacerbated by that climate change. And I'm just wondering, how are we preparing as a country for this?
Well, I'll jump in here, Sarah. And the truth is that for the last 4 years, we have seen a severe step back when it comes to climate change, when it comes to our environment. And we're not prepared, right? Like it's wonderful to see that the president-elect has selected John Kerry to lead a lot of the work around environment. And the truth is, when we look at immigration, oftentimes we miss the intersection of climate change. What we're looking at Honduras and Guatemala with the recent hurricanes that impacted those communities, Eta and Ora, it's important that we recognize that there's a lot of community members who are displaced, that they not only don't have a home to live in, but don't have even an opportunity, a job to go to be able to rebuild. And so what they're going to be looking, and my suspicion is, Sarah, that there will be another wave of immigrants who are coming to the US looking for work opportunities, even amidst a global pandemic. Right? And that we're going to continue to see that. And the truth is that this is happening globally. This is something that's not only happening in our own backyard. We're seeing this in Europe. We're seeing this in the Middle East. We're seeing this across the globe as communities are being displaced because of droughts or severe natural disasters, and they have nowhere to go and are seeking a better home and a better life. So at this point, Sarah, there's a lot of work that the incoming administration is going to have to do to be able to, one, make sure that the agreements that the U.S. had entered into in previous administration are entered to, again, that we're looking at policy in terms of the environment in the different intersections at different levels, and that we're also looking at the intersection of health, right? And the truth is that so many of our community members are impacted by air quality and by water quality and so many other factors. And so, you know, I mentioned the lawsuit that we have in terms of the pesticide pluriferous, which is used on farm working communities. And, you know, for us, it's so important to be mindful that we have to be absolutely active, that we have to be absolutely vigilant, that we have to keep our eyes open in terms of what's happening in all the different industries. And also just to mention that, you know, I saw one of the comments in the chat in terms of building this narrative. And I just want us to think about, you know, our own narrative as Latinos and what we have been taught and what we have to unlearn to make sure we're working, you know, breaking those chains from, you know, an incorrect history that has been taught to us by not necessarily ourselves and not including our own commitment to this country, our own contributions. And what I would say is that, you know, particularly on the issue of representation, Sarah, you know, what we don't hear in our Latino homes is like, hijo or hija, I want you to be the next governor or the next president of the United States, right? I don't think I've heard a Latino parent say like, hijo, hija, I want you to be a politician. And so I think we also have to take a step back and make sure that we are empujando and making sure we're opening those minds of our children. I happen to have a 3 and 5 year old, and I will tell you, Sarah, that, you know, when my daughter or my son tell me like, yo quiero hacer esto, or mommy, I want to do this, I'm like, yes, tú puedes. You tell me, you're like, I will be there right with you. And whatever it is, I think this is where we have to shift the narratives. But I think we also have to understand, Sarah, the racial injustices that exist, the institutional discrimination that it's in place, what we, you know, how we have been absolutely displaced, whether because of internal culture or because of other factors. You know, there is, again, a lot of work to do. And, you know, unfortunately for LULAC, Sarah, we should be out of business 91 years later. And we are as relevant today as we were in 1929, if not even more. And so, you know, it's regretful that we have to say we're going to be around for 100 more years. But, you know, I'm hoping we can go out of business before then, because we absolutely have a lot of work ahead.
Thank you. We have an audience question. This is actually from one of our board members, Velma Valle Ibarra, wants to ask Domingo if you think that the recent DACA decision by the federal judge, I think she's talking about just last Friday, what happened, do you think that's going to go to the Supreme Court for review?
Eventually, yes. Unfortunately, like I said, we gotta, you know, I use barrio slang to emphasize a point. Tenemos un pendejo for Attorney General of Texas. His name's Paxton. He's also a criminal who's been indicted and is under FBI investigation, and he's trying to throw people off the track. But he's the one that filed the original challenge to DACA that went to the Supreme Court. I do believe, though, that the President Biden, elect Biden, will pass a DACA executive order that will allow them to retain for 4 more years. And I think that probably will withstand federal scrutiny. But we do now have a new Supreme Court, and with 6 conservative Republican judges, that's still a little dicey, iffy issue. But at least it'll take several years before it gets to the Supreme Court again.
Mm-hmm. We have another comment about the extreme backlog of people who have been trying to legally become citizens, to naturalize. Do you have any thoughts on what to do about that backlog? And I'm sorry, let me add on to this, and the existing wait period. That it just, yeah. So
in our LULAC has drafted a wish list to President Biden on immigration, education, healthcare, et cetera. And among those is to basically Trump close down legal immigration for all intents and purposes. I mean, literally, you cannot legally come to this country at this point. So we need to open those doors back up, hire those immigration judges, those processes, the people that are processing those, open more aisles so that more people that are in line can get through. I saw somebody posted that they waited 9 years for a relative to get through. That's not unusual. That shouldn't happen. If they're legally qualified and they're eligible, they should be able to come in. And that quota that we have for countries needs to change. And the fact of the matter is, we can expand how many people come in. There is a demand, a pent-up demand for labor and work. And I think that's the way to do it for those who want to come in legally and are already in line. We need to just create more aisles and bring them in. And that's one of the things we hope to do.
Yes. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned the Know Nothing Party from the turn of the century. And unfortunately, it does seem that for a very long time, immigrants have been targets, whether it was the Irish or the Italians or Latinos. Unfortunately, we have seen immigrants as target go from, I don't know, not very friendly persecution of immigrants to now quite violent in some cases. Attacks on immigrants, such as the case of El Paso that Cindy mentioned. And I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts on how we can work with the community to promote a mind shift in how people understand immigrants so that we remove this idea that immigrants are in any way somehow a problem? How do we take that away from the national, thinking?
You want to take that one, Cindy, first?
Well, I mean, I would say, Sarah, as we look at this issue in terms of the narrative of our Latino community, the truth is that it's not going to happen overnight. And, what we knew from the FBI data report is that there is an increase in hate crimes. There is an anti-Hispanic sentiment. We do see white supremacist groups who are attacking our community, sometimes simply for speaking Spanish in public. And, we've seen this, with our community across the U.S., or our community being harassed, our own children being harassed in their schools for saying something in Spanish. And I will tell you, Sarah, that as a parent who speaks both English and Spanish to my children, I am horrified of what we have to do to make sure that our children and all America understands that being bilingual is absolutely in the benefit of our country as a globalized economy, making sure that we have multiple languages. But I would add to that, as we look at possible solutions, one of our asks has been that the Biden-Harris administration look at restoring a task force within the White House to look at hate crimes specifically, and that we actually have a bill passed in Congress. And I just want to mention here that it's not only Latinos, right? The truth is that hate crimes have increased against our Muslim community, against our AAPI community, against African Americans, against our LGBTQ community, especially our transgender community, and that we have to understand that right now in this country, we are seeing the worst of white supremacists. We're seeing the worst of radicalized groups who believe that communities of color do not belong here. And the truth is, Sarah, that they understand the writing on the wall when they look at the numbers. And again, for those folks who are just tuning in, today we're 60 million strong, and in just 30 years, Latinos will be 130 million strong, which means that 1 in 3 Americans will be of Latino ancestry. So there's no question here that the future of America is Latino, that Latinos have a role to play, and that as we look at the next 4 years, 10 years, 15 years, shifting that narrative is going to be very important. It starts with us at the local level. And I just want to highlight something that Maggie pointed out, which is that for LULAC, the heart of LULAC is our members. Really what makes LULAC so powerful is all our volunteer members who live across the 41 states, Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, who every day as volunteers wake up to fight the good fight. When something is happening, whether it's in Pilsen, Illinois, or whether it's in Dallas, Texas, or whether it's in San Juan, Puerto Rico, or whether it's in Washington, D.C., or whether it's in Iowa or Wisconsin or Washington State, it's our LULAC members who are on the front lines fighting for our community. And so I can tell you, Sarah, we're looking at this in a very intentional and strategic manner at the national level with other national organizations in terms of making sure that that narrative is shifted.
Thank you. So once again, the hour has flown by. I would just like to invite Maggie, Domingo, Cindy to make one final comment before we say goodnight.
Let me just finish by again thanking all the work Mexican American civil rights since 1835 till today here in Texas anyway continues to be at the forefront of what I believe in. I believe that the first Latina or Latino president of the United States has already been born, and he or she is walking the streets of San Antonio or Chicago or Los Angeles, and we need to make sure we open the doors to get them there. The first one that's going to walk on Mars, that astronaut, is already here. And it's going to be a Jose or a Maria or a Garcia, Sanchez or a Lopez or a Rivera. And we need to make sure that those opportunities at NASA and at the universities are there. So I think that the work you're doing, continuing that battle for civil rights and making sure that we get no more but no less than what every American gets is the ultimate achievement. And, thank you for giving us this platform. Gracias.
Well, I guess I'll go next. And like Domingo, I want to thank you, Sarah, for hosting this segment and also for having us here. And it's been quite a privilege to be here with Domingo and Cindy. And I guess for me, it's something we often say in LULAC, and we're always saying educate, educate, educate. In every form, in any way that we can, and not just academic education, but in every single manner that you can educate. Educate on the importance of voting, educate on the importance of speaking out when you hear something, when you feel something that is not right. Find the person that can help you find the answers. And LULAC is in every corner of our nation. There's always a LULACero that is willing to step up to the plate and making things better, if not right, for someone. So keeping in mind that the only way we can redirect our history and rewrite that plan is educating ourselves and educating others and coming involved. You need to be involved. And another thing that one of our former LULAC officers always said, everybody out there is a LULAC member, except that some of us have paid our dues and some have not yet. So I strongly encourage you that if you are not a LULAC member yet, please reach out to one of us in any given state, become a member, get involved, help us rewrite our.
Thank you, Maggie. And last but not least, Cindy.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And as a true millennial, I will say, hashtag, and, we use the hashtag nothing about us without us. And we can't be what we can't see. And so I want us to also think of our political power. And we just went through the presidential elections of November 3rd. Finally, I think political candidates are understanding the diversity, the voices that makes up the Latino community electorate, and understanding that yes, we voted, but now it's time to hold the elected officials accountable. Now it's time that we rise up, that we are reaching out to them and making sure that we're uplifting those issues, whether it's education, healthcare access, broadband or technology, making sure that our children are not failing in school, making sure that we are being represented. And so I would say, Sarah, please join us. We cannot do this on our own. We want to make sure we have LULACers across all 50 states. And what I will tell you is that we're in the middle of a movement. The civil rights movement has not ended. We're still fighting the good fight. Join us in making good trouble. Join us in making sure that we are rising up, raising our concerns, and keeping our elected officials accountable. And if you need any more information, please go to lulac.org, or you can follow us on social media. And Sarah, mil gracias for organizing this conversation and for all your hard work.
Thank you so much. I wanna thank our panelists for tonight. I wanna invite those of you watching to join us next Thursday for a lunch and learn at 12 o'clock Central, where we'll be talking about the election and what what are some things to look forward to in the next 4 years. That next week is going to be our last event for 2020, and then we all want to see you back in 2021. So please, everybody, be safe, take care of yourself, take care of your community, and have a good night.